This is Fred Beck from Fred Talks Fighting. Today I'm very lucky to be joined by Kevin Iolie. So thank you very much for coming on, Kevin.
Thanks for having me, Fred.
And what's been going with you, Kevin, then?
Well, I've been covering a lot of UFC fights going into quarantine. Today, I'm going to cover a UFC fight, but thankfully, I didn't have to quarantine. They loosened the restrictions. So I got tested yesterday. Found out this morning that I passed again. So I will be at the fights later this afternoon.
That sounds awesome. So, Kevin, I want to go talk a bit about, before we move on to the fights, I want to talk about a bit about you and your story so far. So, most people who have heard of you know you work for your Kevin Iolie and you work for Yale Sports. But before all that, how did you originally get into journalism?
You know, when I was in high school, Watergate was going on. It was a big thing with the president of the United States. There was corruption, there was a break-in, and the Washington Post really, and other media, but really the Washington Post newspaper dug this out, and they every day they reported on it. At first, nobody was paying attention to it, and then it became built and built and built, and it became this big story, and it forced the resignation of President Nixon. And I was in high school at the time, and I just thought it was so cool that journalists could have that kind of impact. And I always wanted to be involved in sports some way. So it just seemed like the two things. I loved to write. I was good at spelling. I went to the spelling bee and did well. And so I just thought that that was something that would interest me. And so basically, since I've been a freshman in high school, this is what I wanted to do. And all my career, it's the only thing I've ever done.
I'm assuming that you were very interested in sports at the same time as well, then.
I was, it's interesting now that I look back on it, like, you don't need to be a big sports fan or know every statistic. And I have a lot of guys will write me on social media or whatever and say, I want to get into journalism. And I know, the batting average of somebody in this year, and I know the statistics of this guy. And that's really not what's important. But yeah, I'm a big sports fan. You become a little bit less of a sports fan because you can't root when you're a sports writer, right? Or a journalist. You have to be, unbiased and reporting what you see as the facts and the truth. But so as opposed to going out there and cheering on the team and having a cold one with your friends and screaming and yelling for whoever you want to win, you can't do that. But I wouldn't change it. Like, I loved it. I've had a great career, and it's been what I wanted to do, and I've been really happy doing it. And so yeah, it's kind of worked really well for me.
Sounds like it has. And I remember hearing that when you were at Point Park University in Pittsburgh, the first event you covered was the WBC heavyweight title between Larry Holmes and Bernardo Snipes. That's quite a good first event to cover, isn't it?
I was out of college at that point, but I went to Point Park, and I was working at a small newspaper, and I covered a lot of really small fights. There was a local hotel that had club shows every month, and I used to cover those because nobody else wanted to cover them. So when the heavyweight title fight came, my boss said, well, you've been covering boxing for us, so go ahead and go. And so it was really fun to get to cover that fight after guys that would have trouble beating you and me, watching them fight. Now I got to watch the heavyweight champion of the world, so that was really something.
That sounds great. And I see that you cover a lot of the UFC now, but what do you primarily cover more now, boxing or the UFC?
I think I do more UFC because they provide a more consistent product. I try to cover both, but like you a lot of times, like, you'll see these boxing matches that get made and the odds are 5,000 to 1, and it's really difficult to write those fights. Where because the public's not interested in that, right? You just don't get public interest. And hey, we're a business. We want people to read our stuff. And unlike a newspaper, you could write something back in the day when it was print. You never knew who read it or didn't read it, and you could always assume, hey, people are reading my stuff. Now I know to the number who is reading it, and I know what they read, what they're interested, where how old they are, and I know a lot about them. And so I kind of have a better idea of what people want. And it's something that I've learned over the years. And of course, I use the internet and the statistics that we can get from that. So I cover more UFC than boxing. I love boxing. I became a boxing fan when I was very young, and I've loved it all my life, and I still do. But boxing isn't as consistent in terms of putting on the best shows like UFC does.
I see what you mean, because UFC is probably a bit easier to pin down, whereas boxing, you've got all the different promotions like PBC, Matching Boxing, Queensbury. You've got all these different promotions. And what I really want to know is, since I'm based in the UK and you're in the US, what's like people's overall opinion about combat sport in the UK over in the US?
Well, I think, the belief here is that boxing is a lot bigger in the UK than it is in the US, right? And maybe that MMA isn't as big in the UK as I think it's big in the UK MMA, but not as big as in the US. But I mean, I think we look at it and we see how well that the UK promoters do with with boxing, and they make some really good shows, and they draw a lot of fans, and you do a lot better with boxing than we do in the United States. There's no question about it.
And I kind of feel that box is less MMA in the UK because UFC is primarily the biggest MMA organization, and they only come over once a year in March. And in boxing, there's loads of shows over here. And so let's just move on to some big fights. We'll start with the boxing and let's go to the UFC. We're staying in the British fights. You've got Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. They say the contract signed, but obviously still haven't got a date yet, and they haven't got a place yet. And what are your thoughts on that fight, and who do you comes out on top?
I love the fight because I think, for the fans, I want to see the best guys fight the best, because that's when everybody all around the world, not just in, like that's going to be a big fight in the UK because both guys are from the UK, they're popular there. But that's also going to be a fight where around the world, everybody's interested. If you like boxing, or if you used to like it back in the day and you don't really like it anymore for whatever reason, you're going to follow that fight because, two big heavyweights that, they can punch and they got a lot going for them. They're both good talkers. So, there's a lot of things going. I like Fury to win the fight. I think he's the better overall boxer. Usually when I'm breaking down a fight, I say, if you give me the guy who has the better boxing skills, 80% of the time you're going to be okay if you take the better boxer. Not always, but I would say 4 out of every 5 fights that the better boxer is going to win it. And I think Fury has shown that he has better boxing skills, but he also showed, like he did in the fight with Wilder, he can punch if he needs to. He's a big guy. How does AJ, who's always been the bigger guy, how does he deal now with a guy that's a lot bigger than he is? And that's going to be fascinating to see. But I love it, and I think the fight's going to captivate the world.
I kind of feel that when you're in preparation for Tyson Fury, how do you really spar for him? Because he's got quite an unorthodox style. And then if you're sparring for AJ, he's got quite a traditional, I want to say amateur style, but he's got quite traditional hands up here. Hopefully that fight will be made. And where do you think it'll be? Where do you think it'll happen? Where do you think the place will be? I'm
You
assuming
know,
Saudi.
I think they'll fight in the Middle East. That's going to be my guess. Although trying to figure out what they do in the Middle East is always a risky business. But I think that because of how much money they're going to need, they're going to fight in the Middle East. I think that there's issues that it's not as close to being done and in the ring as people think. I hope it gets done, but there's still some work to do before they get in. The good thing is that I think the economics of the fight, which are almost always the most difficult, have largely been agreed upon. Now, they have to get the finances in order, and that's where the site comes in. And so the COVID has impacted even Saudi Arabia, right? Where, I think the fight probably would end up going. And they seem to have money to burn a lot of the times, but maybe now not even so much them. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Certainly will be. And I think that if it wasn't COVID times, you could have 90,000 people in Wembley, and that would be amazing, especially 2 British heavyweights. And so
Oh,
we move across the other side of the pond to UFC in America. We got another great heavyweight fight coming up, a rematch between Francis Ngannou and Stipe Miocic. What are your thoughts on that fight?
I think it's an interesting fight. I mean, the first time I had picked Stipe to win the fight, and I didn't really see it being that difficult of a fight for him. And it turned out to be that way. Stipe's wrestling was the big difference. Stipe still is a better all-around fighter, Fred, than Francis. Francis has that unbelievable punching power. But Francis has improved his overall game. But let's not kid ourselves. Francis is not going to wrestle Stipe. Francis isn't going to look to, submit him. Francis is going to look to hit him on the chin and knock him out. And so, Stipe, has a big challenge ahead of him, because even if you're dominating the fight against Francis, he hits you one time and the fight's over, with a clean flush shot. And so you have to, worry about that. But, I think Stipe is going to have to go up and down, use his kicks, kind of give angles, take him down, push the pace, make Francis fight at a pace that he's not comfortable with. Francis likes to fly out of the corner, throw a lot of shots, and then, kind of slow it down, and then come back, and he fights in those bursts. And I think Stipe has got to really, in my opinion, when Francis doesn't want to fight, he has to make him fight. And I think that'll be an interesting to see if he's able to pull that off.
It certainly will be. You mentioned the wrestling there. I heard today that Usman has been training a bit with Francis, and Usman's going to be in his corner. And what I was just thinking as well is that, when was the last time that Francis went the full 5 rounds?
Oh boy. I'd have to look that up. Off the top of my head, I can't remember. He may have never gone 5 rounds, right?
I think it was Derek Lewis.
Derek Lewis was a 3-round fight.
Oh.
I think. Yeah, that wasn't the main event that day. So he didn't go 5 rounds in that fight. But that, the fight with Derek Lewis was a terrible fight. I mean, that was one that when it happened, we were expecting it to be one of the best fights ever, because look at the two guys and the way they fight. And we thought it would just be bombs away. And they both, I remember I was there that night, and people were booing it. They were lighting lighters and holding up their phone flashlight. And it was crazy. They were doing everything they could to protest. And the guys never really got into it. It just was a bad fight from start to finish.
Well, hoping that Stipe and Ngannou 2 will be a great fight. Anyway, I don't think I got too much of time, so I've only got one more question.
Sure.
For any future journalists watching this, do you have any advice for them?
Of course, don't just, the number one thing is, don't just hone in on one thing, get a diverse education. And if you're in journalism school, that's great. But, work on broadcast, work on, on writing, hone your reporting skills, know how to do interviews. And I would say read a lot, read other good writers. And because even if you're on television, you're on broadcast, you're going to have to be able to write. And so if you read good writing and you understand how to formulate good questions that elicit good answers, you're going to be ahead of the game. So, get a diverse education, get as much practical experience as you can. You can do something now that I couldn't do when I was that age. I used to lay in bed and announce games, when I was a kid, 13, 14, 15 years old. I wanted to be an announcer, and I would sit there and I would imagine a baseball game, and I would do the play-by-play of it. You have the internet now, and you can get a blog, and you can write, and you can talk about it just like you're doing with me. You have the ability to do that. So take advantage of it and do it. And then when you do, like if you decide to write a story, go and look at somebody else who covered it, a professional, and compare, what you did well and what you didn't do so well with them. And I think that that'll help you improve a lot. But I think the diversity of your education and reading a lot is going to be very important.
That's very good advice. Advice from the best, Kevin Iolie. So Kevin, thank you so much for your time. And where can people find you on social media at?
Well, I am on Twitter at Kevin I, Kevini, and on Instagram at Kevin Iolie, Keviniole. And of course, I work for Yahoo Sports. You can find me there.
All right, Kevin, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Okay, Fred, thank you. Appreciate you.